in a way which we have not done up until now. I think there is another aspect in the need for a tally of what happened. I am not talking about a recount of the ballots. I am talking about looking at the sheets that are in each one of the precinct returns where those precincts are in question. This whole proceeding is full of so much confusion and so many inaccuracies that we need somehow to define the areas where there can be substantial agreement on facts. One of the areas of confusion has been apparent through the entire proceeding ever since the matters were brought to a head last November and December, up through the debates as recently as yesterday. I refer to the question of whether or not there has been a recount in New Hampshire, and whether or not, on the basis of a recount, Mr. Durking was actually certified a winner by the Secretary of State. Mr. President, there has been so much talk in these proceedings about Mr. Durking's winning the Secretary of State's recount of the November 5 election in New Hampshire that, after receiving a letter from Senator-elect Wyman earlier this week, in which he pointed out that Mr. Durking did not actually win the Secretary of State's recount at the Secretary's level, when the count was checked out, I checked with Mr. Wyman on this question. He confirmed that except for a clerical error on the letter, reporting a margin of 4 votes that should have actually been 3 votes, the Secretary's level of counting ended with Wyman at +3 votes. This was subsequently reduced by the Ballot Law Commission review to 2 votes. Because this has been generally misunderstood or misreported, I shall outline the documentation from the records in proof of these facts at this time, and I do that simply because it has been stated repeatedly that Wyman won in the original count, but that Durking was the winner after the recount. The fact of the matter is that Durking was not the winner after the recount by the Secretary of State. This is a 180 Congressional record. Basic to understanding of the New Hampshire situation is the fact that the Secretary of State failed to review write-in votes on machine paper during his recount. For this reason, when this became known by the New Hampshire Governor and Council, and upon confirmation by the Secretary of State that he had not done this, the Governor and Council vacated the Secretary's provisional certificate of election and directed the Secretary to complete his recount. In spite of that fact, we still hear allegations made on the floor of the Senate that Mr. Durking was a valid certificate of election, which simply is not true. A review by the Secretary of write-in votes on machines, to the extent that the machine paper was available to him for this purpose. It should be pointed out that paper from several machines is missing and can never be reviewed by him or by anyone else, indicated a net of 3 write-in votes for Mr. Wyman. This reduced the Secretary's count to +7 for Mr. Durking. It also developed in the initial review of the Secretary's count that there were a net of 7 void ballots that had also been wrong counted for Mr. Durking. This reduced the Secretary's count to 0. Finally, in the course of review by the Ballot Law Commission, it developed that there were 3 miscalls of ballots for Mr. Durking, acknowledged by Durking's counsel to have been miscalled by the Secretary, and the net result that Mr. Wyman should have been reported as 3 votes ahead at the end of the Secretary of State's recount, instead of Mr. Durking at +10. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the Andrews electric vehicle amendments. The distinguished gentleman from Washington is a colleague of mine in the Energy Research, Development, and Demonstration Subcommittee, and these amendments are a result of our hearings on electric vehicles last week in our subcommittee. Our distinguished colleague, the gentleman from Florida who participated in those hearings, was also instrumental in the introduction of these amendments. I commend both gentlemen for their efforts. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the gentleman from Washington and I, along with other distinguished members of the Science and Technology Committee, introduced the Electric Vehicle Demonstration Act of 1975 with the objective of providing for a timely and effective demonstration of the very real potential of electric vehicles. Our subcommittee held hearings on the bill for 4 days last week. Testimony received at the hearings and the electric vehicles displayed and demonstrated here during the hearings, which I am sure many of my colleagues saw and inspected during the week, have provided convincing evidence that electric vehicle technology is available today, which can be used in many applications in place of fossil-fueled internal combustion engines. Specifically, witnesses testified that several hundreds of thousands of vehicles in the fleet market in the United States are prime candidates as a market today. For example, there are several 100,000 urban delivery vehicles today. In fact, over 40,000 milk trucks in Britain are electric powered today. Large utility vehicle fleets are another example. One such utility fleet